here is so I'll just go back to the start. So our coastal landscapes and our upland landscapes, one of the great things about Ireland is that our mountains are largely coastal. And in recent years, there's been an upsurge of interest in a coastal ecology, coastal archaeology, right next to our mountains. So we have very early settlements now from Innistrahull off Donegal, Doonanora, West Kerry, the Cork Harbour area. And this site here is a group of Norwegian students from Trondheim looking at a shell midden on the Connemara coast. These typically date between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago. And we've a lot of new Mesolithic sites actually on the Fenora coastline, off the Clare coast, and all along the Connemara coast. So we have mudstone axes traded up from the coast of Clare through the island chain of Canton and Nilon and up along the west coast of Ireland. So this is over the longest period in Irish history, 4,000 to 5,000 years old. And we've recently found some with excavations from archaeologists from Queens on Mesolithic hunter-gatherer settlements at Knocknashee in a huge hill fort near Turbercurry. So we have evidence of utilization of our uplands in the Mesolithic pre-farming populations. And we also have some evidence, of course, of the Paleolithic in Ireland, rarely commented on. One of the oldest artifacts we have is from Dunangus. It's 300,000 years old. And the great Frank Mitchell, attorney professor in Trinity, found Paleolithic artifacts at Mel near Drogheda. And there's a upsurge of interest in the old Stone Age, but the new Stone Age from 10,000 years onwards is my focus today. More recently, I published an article on this site here. It's a very interesting site. It's a portal tomb in Cork Harbour, Rosthelen, and it's a tomb that has been discussed over many years, whether it's original or not. But I've been working on the intertidal zone recently, and we found, as you can see on the screen, I hope, there's a small chamber, but it's got a long train with it. And a train is actually a typical feature of a portal tomb. So we're now fairly convinced, based on a recent survey of it, at low tide. Lots of people visit at half tide. You don't go to the shore at half tide, you go at low tide. So this looks like a Neolithic early farming community around Cork Harbour. When we have other evidence also, and one of the nice things about portal tombs, you find them in Western Britain and Cornwall, you get them in Wales. And this one is a fantastic site. A little bit dilapidated, as you'd expect from a 5,700-year-old tomb. It's from Hornhead, and this is right up Crockneve in the background. This is we're looking across there towards the islands of north of Bloody Foreland, Crockfalla there. So in the Neolithic, there's people everywhere in Ireland. So by 5,800 years ago, a new population movement in, and they're colonising not just the good land, the marginal land. There's a flood of people coming in across just around 6,000 years ago. On the coastline, we also see particularly evidence in the southwest of drowned landscapes. So we have many drowned landscapes. The portal tomb at Cork Harbour, when that was built, and at the Lag near Baltimore, both of those tombs are in the intertidal zone. There's been 5 to 6 meters of sea level rise since the Neolithic in the southern half of Ireland. Recent sea level change and more powerful dynamic storms have saw the destruction of some tombs. This was a lovely little wedge tomb on Sherkin Island, if you've ever been on the west side of Sherkin. This was photographed maybe 20 years ago now. The last storm, 2014, and subsequent one, it's all gone. It's been stood there for 4,000 years, and it's now vanished. So we have an issue with coastal erosion impacting on some of our earliest sites, particularly our shell midden sites. But this little tomb also is one of the casualties of the recent storms. And of course, our uplands have changed and changed again. The biggest change, of course, came with the introduction of sheep and the big level and the destruction of our wolf population, which restricted what animals would and wouldn't go. Since the wolves ended in Ireland in the early 18th century, or maybe into mid 18th century, been a huge increase of sheep as opposed to cattle. The Irish really were a basic cattle running society. Cattle almost had the status of individual, but that all switched in the 18th century. So our landscapes as we see them now are ones without cattle by and large, the uplands especially. And but we begin to see these now, as we see them now, as sort of semi-natural. They're not natural at all. They've been massively modified over the last 200 years due to intensive grazing since the 18th century. And here, of course, you have the evidence of this late Neolithic forest, which you have throughout the uplands of Ireland. So these trees, this is also this evidence of massive climatic change in the late Neolithic. This site is from the Nathan Beg Range mountains. Some of the lesser known mountain landscapes that I've worked on over the years are these ones here, which are hugely interesting, if not that well known. The Brickleaf Mountains in Sligo-Leitrim border. This view, I think, is like a view out of South Africa, Table Mountain, but this is Ireland's Table Mountain. Is looking into it from the west, and right on the summit of this beautiful ridge, I found a small little tomb, but it's part of a very large Neolithic landscape that stretches from Cluskmore all the way back into Manorhamilton, an exceptionally important area. The lowlands here are full of Neolithic sites. I was first introduced to this area by Johan Björnholt, who only died this year. He was a Swedish archaeologist in the late 70s, actually, as a student at Carramore. And subsequently, I surveyed it for the OPW with the assistance of lots of local people. Martin Timley, number one, Brendan Rooney, most importantly. And of course, Leo Layden has done incredible work mapping the archaeology beneath this mountain, Steve Bawn. So these uplands had been considered, as Professor Coney in UCD once said, there's no significant upland settlement in North Leitrim. When you hear something like that, you say, I wonder what he meant by that. Almost always he meant, well, I didn't go up there. But we went up there and we flew the area and we walked it, and we met Brendan Rooney at a lecture in the Sligo Field Club. And he said, did you ever see these tombs? I said, what tombs? He said, well, the whole hilltop is full of them. And when you're up on these mountains tops, you have these large eroding peat hags, incredible erosion going on right across our uplands on a massive scale. And so these peat hags are 2 meters deep, but beneath them and entombed in them, you have these sinkholes all over the place. A very unlikely place for settlement. But when you get up there, these uplands here are just littered with an extraordinary array of Neolithic sites, Bronze Age monuments, and much later medieval and post-medieval settlement. This one here is probably a late medieval Booley complex. This is looking across at Mullaghmore. This is one of the newer tombs here that I found a few years ago on the way back from Donegal in a beautiful evening, heading up onto the hill, Slieve in the background. So this is right on the northern nose of those mountains. But further down between Glencar and Glenaid is an extraordinary complex. This is Brendan Rooney on the right, member, former president of Sligo Field Club, his son Brendan here, and we're on a field trip. This was 2 years ago, having first surveyed the site in the late 80s, early 90s. What's lovely about it is relatively unchanged, this part. Big wind farms off to the east. But behind it is an area called Mean na Matarua, the grassy sward of the Fox. And this little area, hollowed out area behind it, is just full of prehistoric sites. And this tomb in front of us is your classic architect's plan wedge tomb. Wedge-shaped, narrowing to the back, higher at the front, decreasing in height. It's like left there by the type site of your late Neolithic, early Bronze Age tomb builders. So this dates from 2200 BC. A whole new people, a whole new landscape, new archaeology, but the uplands are still important. And these sites are scattered across the area. The other site, which he showed me a photograph, was this extraordinary monument. This is a long cairn, and it looks to be the remains of a multi-phase Neolithic tomb that started off life as a round cairn. And this is the round cairn here with the rune chamber here at this end of it. This is looking south here with this 50-meter long cairn. So it sits on this plateau, now bog bound, but all around it you have this lost landscape. So not that there's no significant upland settlement. It's one of the most significant upland sites we have in Ireland from prehistory and ongoing histories later on, because it was farmed from both sides, from Glencar and Glenaid. But thanks to Brendan Rooney, he brought this site to life initially, and there's lots more work being done. Michael Moore from the Archaeological Survey has done lots of work, but it's one of the great sites of Ireland, of upland. It's like an upland burn with its bog intact still. So quite an extraordinary place. One of the sites, this is one of my favorite sites I've excavated on the summit of this. We've identified a hill fort on top of Croagh. And this is a tomb to the west of it at 4 Mile. And we've identified now a lot of other sites in the area between Killadoon, sort of nearer to Kerry Harbour, and this lovely lowland area here. More recently, we've identified these sites. These are up on top, and the hill walkers would have passed over these for years, of course. This is on the eastern end of the Nathan Beg Range, a double cairn with a little causeway across to it. And an absolutely fantastic site. So it's the most eastern peak above Newport. Very substantial cairn, still bog bound. So we think maybe Neolithic, but at least it's a certainly Bronze Age from 2000 BC. So we recorded this for the first time this year, in February this year. Started off lovely day, was foul when we got up there. But that's the way of the Uplands. But it's a really significant site. We have at least up to 100 Neolithic Bronze Age monuments crowning our hills. So like just these anchor points holding down Ireland in time and space all around our uplands. So it's one of the lovely things about our mountains is we've so many Neolithic and Bronze Age tops. This one, Cullen, this is one of my favorite sites. And it's above on the Skull. So if you're traveling to Dingle and heading out there, stop every now and again and just stop the car and look to the north. And crowning the ridgeline is this extraordinary complex. So you have two Neolithic tombs about a mile apart, and running between them is this magnificent stone alignment. There isn't another site in the country like it. It's neglected in the sense that it's a tough climb to get up to it. So that's the lovely thing about hill walkers. They're not bothered about climbing mountains. It's been all day in the hills. And it's quite Paddy O'Leary, the late Paddy O'Leary from West Cork, Lee Snodgrass. I remember Paddy talking to me about this site. It's one of the most incredible sites. So stone alignments are typically, in France, they're Neolithic. In Ireland and Britain, they tend to be Bronze Age. So, but this site may actually be Neolithic. I won't go into it now why, but it's again one of these lovely, extraordinary sites. Cullen, so there's a whole legend and legendary landscape associated with it. And it's looking down on this lovely fertile strip here. This is just in the valleys below and close to on the Skull. So a magnificent complex, high on the ridge, but visible from the lowlands. So it's designed to be seen from the lowlands, and it defines this sacred space above and to the east of on the Skull Lake. Quite a magnificent complex there. Closer to Homer, where I live here, we have Joyce Country. There's a whole big project trying to make it a geopark World Heritage Site. So lots of new work is going on there. So we're very fortunate with the whole team locally working on it. And so it's an area, I'm from Connemara, but the eastern edges in Joyce Country has got some very interesting archaeology, but not well documented, up to now anyway. And of course, it's got one of these magnificent sites. This was found by a geologist from the Geological Survey, published by Chris Corlett, who's like a fantastic scholar of the Wicklow Uplands and the southeastern uplands of Mount Leinster, that area. So this is cup and ring circles, Neolithic art, formerly called Galician art. And we're finding this now in large numbers in the Inishowen Peninsula. Fanet, Yvonne Lamb down in Caherdaniel has found acres of it in the Miggity Curryweeks, but Connemara and Mayo is very rare to find it. This is the most important site, and it's close to Loch on the Shee, if you know it's so overlooking Tourmakeady up on the hills. And there's another site near Achill, and of course you have St. Patrick's Chair, or the Bohe Stone, the more famous site. But there's only 5 sites in Connacht, and there's valleys down in Caherdaniel. You'll have, on the way between Sneem and Glen Bay, with dozens and dozens of sites in individual valleys. So we have this very odd. So the prehistory of Ireland isn't constant. There are huge varieties across the landscape. There are periods where we know very little about, areas that are relatively empty. Then other areas, for no apparent reason, there's only one rock art site in Connemara proper, for example. And that is not, we think, as old as this. So these are some of the cup and ring circles. And after the snow about 4 years ago, some of the peat had peeled back off it and revealed, about 11 other new cup and ring circles. Chris Corlett now has published a lovely article on this in the Galway Archaeological Journal. But on the lowlands, overlooking Loch Mask, in and around where the sheep are here, there's another Bronze Age complex with cairns and a stone alignment. So this is a stone alignment in the sort of cutaway bog, an arm of Loch Mask here, Glenbegan to the right. This is near Mom Trasta, those familiar with that lovely part of the world. But again, it's a very unusual complex of tombs In this area, again, you have a central standing stones either side of it, and a beautiful ring bar. The little structure on the right is a classic Iron Age burial mound, which again are exceptionally rare in the mountains of the west, but they're common as muck and Tipperary, down along the Clare coast, lots of them, but very rare up on the Western Highlands, anywhere from West Kerry all the way up to Donegal. They're quite unusual, put it that way, but they're common elsewhere in the country. But this is a lovely example. So the ring ditch would be about 2,000 years old. The alignment dated to 800, 900 BC. But it's a really fantastic site. This is one, Benjamin, who's in charge of the geological survey work there. He had asked me, had I any sites there? And I said, geez, I must go out. I know there's one I spotted years ago when I was hill walking, overlooking Mount Trasna, and I went back to see it. And anyway, the site I went back to see turned out to be a hill fort. Now, this is two friends of mine here, Ian Doherty from Derry and Christy Lawless on the left. Christy Lawless was one of the best field archaeologists I ever met. He's from Turlock and Castlebar, found hundreds of sites, published them, and he died sadly last year, but great loss to archaeology of the West, but really unpublished and great speaker, an expert on Fulloch the Fee, Bronze Age sites. But anyway, just threw this photograph in recognition of his contribution to Irish landscape studies, which has been immense. This was the site. It's hard to see it. You can see why it went unrecorded. This is on the area just north of Finney village, between there and Mom Trasna itself. There's an enclosure here. You can just see the little spindly little walls crisscrossed by much bigger walls. So this is a degraded hill fort. The farmer, he said, Níl rian na bit le fecal husan chinoach. Níl dúnán. There's no fort up there. There's not even a track of a fort up there. I said, tá sé fuin na sean correspondent, tá sé le fecal. Anyway, we went up and had a look at it, and it's there. Degraded hill fort. But he said on the way down, Arwaka through Lorag Fork. I said, Niakabe, Chawilche. He said, Tá sé hís an Ekelish and Shanbohar, go la huo finny go Mom Trasta. And he was right. So he said, Trumpy, he said, did you see the Lorag Fork? And this is actually the footprint of St. Patrick on an old pilgrimage route from the lakes north over Mount Trasna up into the Dirks and out over into the valley. So it's still a little shrine. There's a cairn around it. This was unmapped, an amazing site, still visited by pilgrims, with the footprint of Patrick. The Lorag is the imprint of Patrick still in it. And of course, the hill fort at Finney would have looked a little bit like this one. I was trying to find one in a similar setting. This one is overlooking Ardra in Donegal. So I worked for Brian Lacey many years ago and the Donegal Archaeological Survey, and got to map the whole southwestern end of Donegal with a whole group of lovely archaeologists at the time. And Brian is still going strong up in Dunlewy. So this is a very interesting hill fort. It's not a big one. It's about 80 meters across, but it's in an area which is packed full of upland archaeology from there to Slieve League. But one of the sites I did find up there was this lovely site at Mahara near Tarman. It's a series of lake dwellings. And one of the lovely things about lake studies recently in Scotland, they've found, so this is a natural island. It's walled on the landward side and it's got a causeway running out to it. Excavations have shown these sites in Scotland, in Lewis, for example, and on Harris, that they date to the Neolithic. So we always assume these sites were Iron Age, early Christian, we know some of them, reused by the Gaelic lords, but they could well be Neolithic in origin. So this is a fantastic site. And for those who haven't been to Lochadoon on the Dingle Peninsula, this is a direct parallel for it. This is this fortified island tucked into the mountains before you cross the Connor Pass. This site was surveyed by Judy Coppage doing her wonderful work on the Dingle Archaeological Survey. So this is a most interesting site. There's rock art around the valley. There's a prehistoric Bronze Age landscapes on the way in. So Lochadoon is one of these fabulous landscapes in the western end of the Dingle Peninsula, but on the north side, which is not that visited too often. But there is a trail and a lovely archaeological trail and public access all the way in. The other place I've worked on, of course, is on the Skelligs. I had a great good look throughout there many years ago, having been invited to Valentia Island by Frank Mitchell. And shortly after that visit, when he was doing his lovely book on Valentia, I visited the Skelligs. This is the reconstructed altar of the Great Skelligs, the main monastery across and then you have little skelligs. So I'll just talk briefly about a couple of discoveries here. So this is the top of the South Peak. It's a bit of a tight scramble. You need a permit now to go up there. The main monastery here, there used to be a cross on top of this one. It fell sometime in the late 70s. And Des Lavelle, of course, has published lovely stuff on it. But I had flown it with Marcus Casey, a late friend of mine. He's dead, sadly. And I had spotted a number of features that I said, well, these haven't been recorded. And these were these red lines here. These are ancient additional routes on the skelligs that had not been mapped before. One of them was here below the main monastery. So I'm sitting on the path which I'd spotted from the air, but got back to it years later. And when we visited, you can see there's some stonework where the ranging rod is. And as you come down and pull off this campion, we probably are not allowed to do that now, but anyway, we did it in the spring about 10 years ago. And so there's a whole other system of routes other than the main recognized routes up on the skelligs. And it had to be leading somewhere. Where it was leading was to this little shrine. It's a beautiful, on the left, it's hard to spot it. The 101 uses for a black plastic bag is here. So it's a little, the skellig, the word skellig means a sliver of rock. So right across the skelligs, there is a series of natural rocks that have been etched and molded and shaped into this. So the whole island was one big archaeological, a sacred landscape, a Christian landscape, of course. Not just the monasteries, but every bit of that island was imbued with prayer. A fortress for Christ is how you'd call it. But also there is a tradition mentioned again by Des Lavelle, and it's also, we have a historical reference to it now, which I've got, describing the pot of monks on little skelligs. Now this is the little skelligs, a very calm winter's day, and we climbed it. And this is Con Moriarty, climbing buddy of mine. We climbed it, and up on a shelf, high up, there's a little building here on the right-hand side. Now, the most amazing thing about this rock is the sheer amount of rubbish that's up on top of it. This is 300 feet up, full of guano, dangerous to climb on. You need dry conditions, hard winter conditions when there's no birds. But underneath the guano, there's a building, and we think this might be another little oratory, similar to the one on the South Peak. But it's an extraordinary remote site, as if the South Peak on the Skelligs wasn't remote enough. This is a quite amazing site. You can see some of the stonework here, and of course some of the early churches are very small. People say, well, it's too small to be a church. It's not too small to be a church, but it's an exceptionally important site. That's Scariff Island in the background here. As you go up, anyway, so that's a really interesting site. We have a historical reference to it. And of course, that whole area is full, as is the uplands of Connemara, South Mayo, of Booley settlements. So what's the most common monument in the uplands? Well, Booleying. This is what a Booley site look like. Most of them are unmapped. Eugene Costello now, the best book written recently on our uplands is by Eugene Costello's book on Booleying. He's a graduate of Galway and UCC, brilliant scholar, recently working in the Reeks. So if you see anything by him, he's a superb scholar. He worked in Connemara, Donegal, and he's now working on sites in the Reeks. So this is a typical setting at the opening of a bigger valley, hidden a cluster of houses. And these would have been used, as you can see, we have an incredible contemporary account of the bullying going on near Lehman Sagar, just north of Glengariff. This is from Hall's account. And we found a woman with her 3 children in the adjacent garden. No, it had bad enough to be sure. While conversing with her, we observed a singular character watching our movement. It is one of the Kerry peasants, mounted on a small active pony, sitting on a pair of hampers, on which he conveyed his tubs of butter to the market of Cork, from where he is now returning. The hampers were fastened to the horse by rope of fay, and his bridle, which was merely twisted around the nose of the animal. So this is an account of a Booley house in Ballionsagart. It's just north of Glengariff. It's the most beautiful place. And it's a rare contemporary account of bullying still going on, which went on in Connemara to the 1920s. That's movement of cattle into the uplands for the summer grazing. And so we have a huge amount of these monuments unmapped in the landscape. There's about 60 of them, for example, between South Mayo and Ursaniok and Connemara. So they're and this is where upland field clubs can do a huge amount, and hill walking clubs. So this is Cullinamain or Lehman Saggart in this gorgeous, just below the stand of trees here. And what you're looking at are these natural rocks which have then been adapted into a boolie house. And Finola Finlay, another archaeologist from West Cork, she's done a fantastic article on this in her blog post. But inside it, what's really surprising, there's a whole series of individual names, and you have this incredible complex art. It's not like your Bronze Age art, it's a whole other art style. We don't know what date of it. It's not modern. We have parallels one side in Connemara. But again, it's an exceptional sort of secretive site in Glengarriff, but a really, really amazing site. This is what it looks like when you transcribe it. And there's lots of, we have a very strong parallel for this now on a cave site in Clifton, or north between Clifton and Leenane. And with a tradition that if you don't inscribe the stone, when you leave the cave, the Shiogi will come after you. So there's a sort of magical religious stuff going on with these caves. But this is Lehman Saggart, just at the bottom of that hill off Glengarriff. Other sites you'd expect to have been mapped. This is a site I found in Donegal. It's a fantastic site. It's called Mala na Seach Leachta. So Mala, the ridge of the 7 leachs or altars. This is the name of the townland. And when you go up north of Gweedore on the way going north across those lovely mountains, you come across na Seach Leachta, as the townland name suggests. And there they are here. This was on a pilgrimage route from the coast at Donegal all the way up across the mountains into the next monastic site. A journey of about 12 miles across the tops. So this is Slee na Sucraja, the way of the funeral paths, and this are, we think, sort of resting points along the way where these cairns are placed up. You find them in southern Achill as well, except there's 50 of them in one spot in Achill. And of course on the Aran Islands you'll see a version of these. The Leachti you get across the road there, and also at Minlo. But they are ancient structures marking a pilgrimage route across the landscape, because it gives its name to the townland name here. So a very interesting site. This is one of my favorite sites though. What I forgot to say at Lehman Saggart, that last site was also a mass rock. This is the only image we have of what a mass rock might have looked like. It's from Milford. And it's a gathering. This is a mass shed. If you see, there's an altar in the background. People arranged. This is the 1870s from Donegal. Quite an extraordinary photograph. Just the numbers, the social classes, social distancing going on, men and women to the left. But this is a mass rock in an estate where it wasn't allowed to have a Catholic mass. So you have a temporary mass house here, a thatched roof shed, open-ended. So really important site. So mass rocks are important parts of our built cultural heritage. Other sites we'll see less well known, but again, a lot of work done on them. Fantastic archaeologists from Driscoll from Kilkenny has published now on linear earthworks. So linear earthworks are Iron Age earthworks, massive, sometimes 10 kilometers long. This is one on Kerry Head. You've been to Kerry Head, lovely walk. And this is, but again, it's eroded here. So these are very vulnerable to land reclamation in the uplands, and not just in the uplands. There's a whole pile of them running across Monaghan, Leitrim into South Donegal. They date from around 2000 BC, but this is a little one named the Clérua on Kerry Head. One of the sites, unfortunately, that I had to visit here, this is a site I found a tomb at Kylemore a number of years ago. It's in Whelan in the National Park, quite a spectacular landscape. My grandmother was from just down the road, one of the Conroys. This is Whelan. There's a tomb on the right, the Abbey here, a magnificent park. And underneath is the old tomb graveyard of Whelan, an enclosed burial ground with a holy well to the right. So there's a terrace of history and archaeology going back thousands of years here. 2 years ago, sadly, the site was damaged. This is what it looks like in wintertime, with all the headstones, footstones, all orientated north-south. Highly unusual site. Untouched, unmapped, and very little history known about it, other than part of the site was used as a children's burial ground. The National Park, taking down 40 years of collapsed deer fences, drove their trucks and their quads loaded with wire across and through the middle of the site and damaged the site. It was like mind-bogglingly stupid. Wasn't done deliberately. Clearly, the men weren't briefed as to what was here. I reported to the guards, and the guards came out, immediately stopped the work. But unfortunately, the National Park response was that they did no damage, that they only removed field stones, and what I said was untrue. So this is the area where they're proposing to build 6 kilometers of new trails in across this landscape right here. So that's what's worrying about it. Within the national parks, we don't need any new trails in the national. We need to move people out of the national parks. But this site was damaged because the staff there weren't briefed by their own managers in the park. This is on every map since 1840. It's on the leaflet the national park gives out to 500,000 visitors a year, Courtdom, Holywell and Burial Ground. The works manager at the site denied there was no archaeology up there, he said to the guards. So this is unacceptable practice. And what's even more unacceptable is that Malcolm Noonan, our minister, who's an excellent guy by all accounts, he published a statement that no damage was done. And what I said about this site, a site I've known, walked over, photographed for 40 years. So there's major concerns about the plan to build a viewing platform right here above this, between the tomb and this burial ground. The EIS for that project was done during the lockdown. No archaeologists visited. They did it remotely. Nothing should be done remotely in our uplands. You have to have experienced field teams up here. But this site has been damaged. There's no damage supposedly here, but you can see the graves have been uprooted, knocked over, and damaged. So it's sort of sad. And of course, like all mistakes, this was a mistake, a genuine mistake. But it shouldn't have happened within the national park system on one of the primary, most important sites. It's one of 2 tombs within the park. The trail, as you can see, went right across it. This is from heavy duty quads with loads with 40 years worth of collapsed wire and fencing on it. Some timber also thrown into it. So I think the Irish Upland Forum should say to the government and say, listen, your actions here were not good enough. You should restore the site to what we know it looked like. And you should ensure that best practices is followed within the national parks. This case, it makes a major question mark over how they handle these issues. This site is really well documented. And anyway, it's a sad story, but it shouldn't have happened. I reported in good faith, and I was called a liar because I reported it. I have photographs of it going back to 1982, virtually every year. Anyway, this is Muilen, a magnificent part within our park, and it's still damaged. Field stones is what the public statement from the minister said they were. And they were going to put back field stones. These are graves, not field stones. My ancestors are buried in this graveyard. Sinead, sorry to end on that note, but it's an important part. We need good management. There's no management plan in this national park. We should have one. This thing shouldn't have happened. But on the positive note, we have to learn from mistakes. But you have to admit your mistake to learn from them. Otherwise, you go on to repeat them. So, Gurmila Mahage, it's a sort of whistle-stop tour through Irish Uplands. Lots of people I didn't get to mention here, but I'm happy to take any comments, good, bad, or indifferent, but I have a wealth of knowledge and experience. I've worked in Uplands all my working life.
Isabel, go ahead there. I think you have your hand up for a question.
I do indeed. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm interested in asking a little bit about trying to marry the struggles that come with being someone who's in heritage, but also in outdoor tourism. So my background personally, I'm involved in I've started a project to do with the heritage around the Wicklow Mountains, because that's where my family's from. And so when you mentioned Chris Corlett earlier, he's actually someone that I'm in contact with. And my idea is to try and make sure that the people who are using the Wicklow Mountains recreationally are more aware of the heritage that's there. And so when I'm talking to various stakeholders, you get kind of mixed opinions because the challenge of balancing both the natural sustainability, the recreational use of the mountains, and the protection of heritage is one where there's a lot of tensions. So, and what would be your take on that, or any advice
Oh,
you have for
I'm no
someone
more. I'm
engaging
very
in such
conflicted.
projects?
Like if you ask, I've said to the farmers, would you not put in a trail across those hills as I'm getting older and have a crocked leg? And he'd say to you, well, Christ, he said, you know, they're nicer looking mountains on the other side of the valley. You know what I mean? So it is a difficult subject. For example, recently the national parks put up signs at Dunlahan, a beautiful coastal macro dune system, hugely important because of the lapwing. But sure, all the surfing dudes who go down there weren't interested in lapwings. They've never looked at them. But the signs, those cars stopped to look for lapwings that never stopped before because they were going down to the beach. So it works in both ways. I'm a believer, though, in providing knowledge is important to inform people. I'm not a great believer in extending, like the plan for the national park in Connemara, 6 kilometres of trails and a brand new car park in around Whelan, which will increase pressure on the mountain knockback massively because people won't just finish on the trail. You know, it'll be drawn up onto the hill, and there'll be a whole other network of trails. So trail development is a very tricky one, and there is no easy answer to it, and it's not. You know, we live in a country where we have absolute property rights, so getting consensus is also very difficult. But we should not be doing EISs in lockdowns. We should be listening to the people with a cautionary approach and who are maybe awkward at times. We should not just be talking within our own little bubble of received, officially approved advisors. It's almost impossible to get anyone who will give you advice contrary to the public narrative. But the uplands, I believe we should leave the uplands as upland as possible. Styles, but not formal trails if we can. And obviously in some areas they're under enormous pressure. You know, the national park is overgrown. We shouldn't be advertising the national parks if they're under pressure as recreational places. They're places of nature, and we should try. So the balance is a hard one to take. You know, are they for the natural world or are they for us? Well, in some places the natural world is losing out because they are national parks, and this is a struggle that you have in national parks all over the place. But in Connemara it's particularly acute because 500,000 visitors visit Kylmore Abbey every year, Kylmore Valley. And now they're proposing to add in additional trails without a proper EIS. The EIS was done during the lockdown. It's not a proper EIS. That's going to cause enormous additional pressure. The pair of grouse that I heard in the valley, they won't last. With another 50,000 visitors proposed for that site I showed you there. So it is difficult, but I mean, I was out on Inishnee Island today with a small group of people on a little trail, an old 19th century track. Stunning landscape. You know, we have so I would love to see more localized trails developed. I'm a big fan of them, particularly if, you know, more people get out. But wilder trails across wilder mountains, you know, I think it is a bit. We have so little in actual wild landscapes, you know, truly wild places. We should be leaving them as wild as possible. But the parks have been used or overused to promote Ireland from a tourism point of view. The funding for work inside the park comes from a tourism budget. There's very little money for actual hard research on the status of them, actual ecological research. So I think the balance in our parks towards tourism, and I've been active in cultural tourism and walking tourism and heard for many years, has tipped the wrong direction. And we should be much more cautious about particularly building hard trails. Now we have to sometimes because they're being worn out anyway. Like I was opposed to the trail on Croagh. We didn't need a trail on Croagh. It was supposed to be a hard place. You know, you don't go on the Hajj to get cold. It was a sacred mountain and should have been left difficult. So the numbers of people reaching the summit on Croagh now are going to increase massively.
And with that, the level of injuries from people who aren't prepared, but who are
undertaking it. Well, it's a holy mountain, they can pray. But the impact on the archaeology was going to be significant. You know what I mean? So, you know,
it's the same up on the Creek Mountains, you know, putting in that staircase to heaven. it has just increased the numbers of people going up there.
And at the same time, those people loved and that experience of being in the hills safely. So these are very tricky issues.
Very tricky.
You know, and there isn't one nice, if there was an easy answer, but
But on the other side of it, then I know what's his name, David Attenborough talks about, you know, if you don't bring people out to see these places and understand them, they won't value them. So there's that sort of balancing thing again to be achieved. But,
yeah, no, I wish you luck with your survey, because I mean, that's a big thorny question. You know what I mean? The main like I would, you know, we need more engagement definitely with our local farmers, communities, because they own the land. You know, the national parks take up such a tiny percentage. Well, it's significant, I know, but they still don't own the majority of our uplands. So engagement with farmers is always good. One of Hugh Musgrave in Pegan Farm, he asked me one time about people parking on his road, and he said, "I have a bloody solution to that." I said, "What's that?" "I'm going to put in a car park," and he did. It's not advertised, but you drive into Cleggan Farm, there's a car park there that takes 10 people. His problem's ended.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? He took the initiative. He looked ahead. He didn't look back. This is my land, you know, and he owns that headland. You know, it's simple, small car park. There's no signpost anywhere. If you're in the know and are interested in finding out about it, it's there. And so,
sorry about that, Michael. So I'm going to cut across again. I'm conscious of time. Ray has his hand up there for a long time. Ray, would you go ahead? You have to unmute, Ray. We can't hear you.
Excuse me. Sorry, Michael. Thanks. A fascinating talk. I'm interested. You used a couple of terms there. Keep the uplands as possible. Last wild landscapes, and I appreciate this talk is maybe more about cultural heritage. I'm interested in your views on the natural heritage. To me, the uplands are very much a human-derived landscape. Do you have a view on them reverting back to an actually wild landscape as they would perhaps look like, or is there an onus or an obligation for us to keep them as they are, or is there room for both? I suppose I'm interested in the return of native woodlands in some areas, at least, of our woodlands. So I'm just wondering, do you have a view on that?
Well, the look of it is dictated by what's grazing it. You know what I mean? So that's the primary thing. We've been grazing these mountains, cultivating them to one level since we became farmers 6 millennia ago. So there's no natural mountain landscapes out there. But there's, since the 18th century, since we got rid of the wolves, the numbers of sheep have massively increased. And that's why we don't have little pocket woodlands as we did. The back at Glenawow, for example, fantastic valley in the Partry Mountains. There's a scrub woodland just clinging on in at the head of it there. I'd love to see that develop. Derryn and Albanock is a side valley on the side of Wheelray, and there are some scrub oaks still there, obviously from the Dera Albanock that was there in medieval times. But we definitely need a reduction in numbers if we want to do that. We need more cattle and less sheep. We need we need the Kerry cows back, or the Dexters. So, because these have been grazed by animals, by cattle, for best part of 6,000 years now. They've been intensively grazed by sheep. There was very little sheep grazing in Connemara in the 18th century, for example, or throughout the uplands at Kerry, and you can see it in the archaeology. The booly hooves are there for a reason. You're booling your minding your cattle, but you're keeping them off. You're keeping the wolves at bay also. So rewilding also has to appreciate what sort of farming was practiced here. Well, booling was, they moved animals up, they took them down and rested the uplands for most of the year, 9 months of the year. So having the knowledge of that background, so Eugene Costello's book on booling, just out, highly recommended. Anyone managing landscapes, it's a sort of, in the Irish landscape, it's one of the best books on Irish uplands for a very long time. But yeah, I'm in favour, but I'm not, you know, which places do we want wolves back? Well, why not? We don't have the landscape like you have in you know, the huge estates that you have in Scotland where it's possible. I'd love to see wolves on Jura, for example, get rid of the 30,000.
Just a little west of Leenane, there's a little townland called Letterera, and if you look up, there's a gorge woodland. It's tiny. One tree on either side of a deep ravine. It's well worth throwing your eye on. Yeah,
well, it's there because the sheep can't get at it. It's simple as that. You know, it's not rocket science. So we need to work with the farmers in terms of the upland peat lines, which are eroding. They should be now our custodians, are a carbon sink. So we need a bit more imagination, bringing the hill farmers in to say, you're stewards of our bogs, and let's work together to, if you look at Lisukter Mountain, for example, one half of it, it's like two different geologies. One side is owned by the forestry, they haven't planted it, and it's all heather. The other side has been grazed for 2 centuries now. There isn't a heather left on it. But the heather hasn't been there for a good century and a half. So, we have to get back to the idea the farmers own the country, they are the custodians, and we need better engagement with them at all levels.
Yeah. And they need a payment structure that supports that. What you're talking about, I think
but we are not just a payment structure though. We need an attitudinal change.
Yeah.
The farmers offered the national park to link up the trail with the old road that ran through Kylemore Valley. The parks turned them down flat. Whereas now we have a new car park, 6 kilometres of new trails, been given planning permission, not linked in to the Western Way or to the trails at Letterfrack. Utter shafford, madness. So, we need to widen the audiences out of the park and get the parks to say, listen, work actively with farmers. There's no local, in Connemara National Park, there isn't a local committee that they work with to say, throw ideas by. Gerard O'Donnell is up in Donegal now. When Gerard was in charge of the park here, and I didn't agree with him, I would always be invited to give a talk in the park. He invites in contrary people. And that's what you should do. If you're only talking to people you agree with all the time, you learn nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Anyway, these are big issues, but they're worth debating. And
archaeology
has,
very much, Mike.
Archaeology has a big role to play in this because there's lots of new science coming through. Loads of work. Stephen Berg's work in the Burren is fundamental to it. Graham Warren's work from UCD on the Mesolithic, is really, really important. Lovely book just published on it. So it's a really exciting story for hill walkers or people. The Uplands are just full of our open air museums, and they're such a rich archaeological base to them. There are timescapes, so they're really fabulous places. So, but I do think we need to get a bit more serious about engaging with our local landowners.
Well, could I say, Michael, on that, the Irish Uplands Forum was established for that very reason. So there's a lot of consultation and dialogue that goes on with farmers, with local community people. And,
but for example, I bet you didn't object to the fact there was no EIS done in the Connemara National Park. You know what I mean? Or observed during the lockdown. There's no management plan for the Connemara National Park yet. They're going to spend millions with tourism funding to actually wreck a restored peatland. You know what I mean? So
yeah, but can I say that's and it's not slightly different. We are engaged with all sorts of issues, but we deal primarily with farmers on private lands or on commonage.
But you should be dealing with the state. Yeah, but the state is, the state needs reform as well. It's not like they are the experts and we're the people. There's expertise in and out of the state. I worked for the state for years. Fantastic. And most of my friends who worked in that archaeological work are still working for the state. I work with them almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. These are huge issues, and the underfunding of the national parks for years meant that they did minimal amount of consultation with the people in the immediate catchments and farmers adjacent to the lands. But that's it. Do we have any other questions or queries for Michael? No? Okay. Michael, just to say thanks so much for your wonderful talk tonight. It's been a tour de force, I think, on the uplands, the coastal sites, ranging from the Paleolithic through to the Iron Age, I suppose with a primary focus on the Neolithic, but it's been really superb. I'm familiar as a hill walker with many of these sites, but I suppose it's wonderful to get them put into context and in the sense of how they fit into the overarching picture and in the European context, or Scotland and some of these other sites. So fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Before we finish, could I just maybe talk to, my screen doesn't want to move again. But just to say, this is the first of 4 lectures being hosted by the Irish Uplands Forum. So we will have a series of lectures for the next 3 months on different aspects of the uplands, not just focused on archaeology. So I'd urge people to look up the irishuplandsforum.org/events. So just look up the website and you'll see pointers to the other lectures, and they'll be on Wednesday evenings for the next 3 months to November. For some reason, this thing doesn't want to move on me. I don't know why, but I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to try and see if I can share it again to get it to come up. And see if we can make it move. So what I wanted to do was get it down to that bit there. If I see, does that show up? There's the upcoming webinar. So if you just look at irishuplandsforum.org, and I also would really much like to thank the Heritage Council is our primary funder, and they've been superb in providing us with core funding this year, and it's allowed us to develop this series of webinars and a whole lot of other activities. So thanks to the Heritage Council, and it's great to be part of the National Heritage Week celebrations. So I would just like to say thank you to everybody, and you've been with us for a bit longer than an hour now, but thanks to everybody for their forbearance earlier on in the session, and really like to invite you to join us again on the subsequent months, looking up our website here for the pointers to the links. So thanks very much indeed, and to Mikey in particular, it's been brilliant to have you on board.
Come on, guys. Thank you.
No, this is good.
So.
Thank you.